Hello, everyone, and welcome to our teletown hall tonight. There are hundreds of you signing in right now, joining us, so we want to welcome you. While you're all coming in, I'm going to give you your first reminder. Our purpose of tonight's meeting is to bring you some information, but we also want to answer your questions. So tonight, whenever you have a question that you'd like to put forward to any one of our guest speakers tonight, please hit *3 on your handset, and someone will talk to you and take your question down immediately. So don't forget that, *3 if you have any questions. So again, we want to welcome the hundreds of you who are joining our teletown hall tonight with SEIU and CUPE. It's so exciting to have our two unions coming together tonight. I believe this is the first time we've done a teletown hall together. We've done a lot of work together over the last year, but this is our first teletown hall. So there will be thousands of you joining tonight, and we're going to have the opportunity as well to tape this session tonight, so it'll be available on our websites for you to share with all of your coworkers, colleagues, and friends who were unable to attend tonight. So again, I just want to welcome everyone to our telephone town hall tonight. We so appreciate your time. We know how very busy you are, and these are extremely busy times right now as we're in the third wave of this pandemic. So we do appreciate your time, and we're hopefully going to make it very valuable for you tonight. I'm coming to you from Innisfil, Ontario, up north here. It's the territorial land of the Anishinaabe people, and I'm proud to be and very thankful to be sitting on that land tonight in our teletown hall. So again, everybody, one more time, *3 on your handset if you've got any questions. So again, I want to stop and just thank you, and I know everyone on the call tonight feels the same way. I want to thank you and honor all of you for the work that you've been doing over the last 14 months, taking care of our loved ones, keeping our province healthy and safe and protected. And we know what you do every single day. We know the challenges that you faced. We know the barriers that you've had to overcome. We do all honor you and appreciate you from the bottom of our hearts tonight. You are heroes, believe me. We knew that pre-COVID. We know it now, and we're going to be sharing some information that'll help protect you and inform you on some upcoming information that the government's done. So welcome, everyone. Again, so excited to be holding this town hall jointly with CUPE. Our two unions have worked together throughout the past year, as you know, on many initiatives. Great successful campaigns and lobbying are just a few. And on some of those successes, they included the pandemic pay. I know that seems like forever ago, but there was a time when we had to fight for pandemic pay. We did get it temporarily, and we continue to fight for it. We together collectively lobbied and got improvements and amendments to Directive 5 to keep you safe and protected at work. We've had some legislative increases, albeit temporarily, for staffing of PSWs, again, working on everyone to get wage enhancements and making it permanent. Throughout the last year, we did get some good news on the legislative increase on staffing levels for long-term care. Great announcement, taking too long to get it there, but it has been legislated, which is something to celebrate. And now we're working together to ensure that you are adequately informed and protected as we live through this third wave crisis. We've got long-term care nurses, RPNs on the phone, and we've got hospitals. So again, this is relevant to both of you. We welcome all of your questions. We're going to be talking a little bit about upcoming hospital bargaining that we're all awaiting. And again, among the many things SEIU and CUPE have successfully partnered on over the past year, I'm excited to announce that the hospital RPNs on the call, that we've decided to do the upcoming bargaining together as well. So SEIU and CUPE will be doing this upcoming bargaining together. And you'll hear more about that later from my co-hosts on the call tonight. You know, we've proven over and over again that we are stronger in numbers, that when we fight together, we win together. Despite the need to physically distance together, we always find a way to lock arms and speak with one voice. And that's what we're going to be doing in bargaining, and that's what we're doing tonight. So you tonight are among the first to hear that we will be doing that bargaining together. Your struggles, challenges, and the desire to be respected, protected, and paid what you deserve is a goal that both of our unions share, and we are going to join together virtually and hopefully physically when we can, to demand that after a year like none other. RPNs get the respect, the protection, and the pay you deserve. And I'm so excited about the possibilities of doing this work with CUPE. I believe that opportunities like this come rarely, and that we must not let those opportunities disappear, and we must not let any of those possibilities slip away from us. So I hope to see all of you embrace this opportunity. Your unions, the two of us have placed before you, and we want you to join us in everything possible and every action that we do moving forward. We want to take advantage of it, and we want to win. We want to win the respect, the protection, and the pay for all. You have been there for your patients, you've been there for their families, the government, you've been there for the people of Ontario, and you've been there for your coworkers. You have all showed up every day. You have had your own worries, challenges, and fears. Some of you have even contracted COVID-19. We all owe you a debt of gratitude, and it begins tonight. You're being asked again to show up, to gown up, to continue to fight against this unforgiving virus and its variants, despite getting very little respite from the rest from the first and second waves. And now you're being asked to do more, even outside your scope of practice. So we are here tonight together, thousands of SEIU and CUPE nurses, to do three things. We want you to listen, we want you to learn, and then we want you to engage. We need you nurses to suit up, not only for your patients, residents, and clients, but for yourselves, your coworkers, your families, and your loved ones. We want you to join our campaign for respect, protection, and pay. We're going to ask you to go to your respective unions' websites, and at SEIU Healthcare, or Michael will be sharing your sites, or SEIU nurses, and there is an email that we want you to join on, sign on, and send the government a message. You can go on the website and you'll find that. We need you to lock arms with us to make a difference for RPNs in this province. We're calling on you to do that tonight. So again, sisters and brothers, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please stay safe, stay well, and always stay protected and take care of yourselves. It's an honor to be here with you tonight, and I'm now going to pass it on to Brother Michael Hurley. Michael.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Such a pleasure to work with you. Such an outstanding leader and great example of collaboration to the rest of the labor movement. I want to thank each of you also for the tremendous courage and dedication that you've shown in the face of the pandemic. Extended shifts, mandatory overtime, canceled vacations, redeployment. You've dealt with all of that, and you've done all that under the threat of a virus which has proven to be deadly. Even though you have not always been adequately protected against that virus, you have really stepped up for the people of Ontario, and you have earned a tremendous debt of gratitude. During the pandemics, registered practical nurses comprise a significant number of the 21,472 Ontario healthcare workers who have contracted COVID at work. RPNs have died. They're among the 21 who have died in Ontario, healthcare workers, after contracting COVID at work. And I regret to say that our two unions have had to fight for a fit-tested N95 mask and face shield for many of the nurses that we represent. In a study that we did during Wave 1, many nurses reported that they were threatened and belittled if they asked for an N95 mask. SEIU and CUPE have written to the Chief Medical Officer of Health 3 times on the issue of airborne transmission, and the only time he replied, I regret to say, was when we took the government to court together and won improvements to Directive Number 5 that liberalized access to protective equipment for all healthcare workers. Our polling shows that RPNs are suffering from a high level of stress, anxiety, and demoralization about their rising workloads, the danger of contracting COVID and passing it on to their families, the lack of support they feel from government and employers in terms of WSIB or paid sick leave or paid isolation pay. This time, we are going to take a new approach in our bargaining to deal with some of these problems. We have entered into a common front, our two unions together, as we approach bargaining. We started to bargain together in the last round of bargaining, and we negotiated successfully then. And that partnership has continued through the Respect Us, Protect Us, Pay Us campaign, and now it will continue into bargaining. I want to take a moment again to acknowledge the tremendous leadership that SEIU Healthcare President Charlene Stewart displays on healthcare issues, and I also want to thank SEIU Healthcare Nursing Division Chair Jackie Walker for her great leadership on nursing issues. The hospitals have agreed to bargain with CUPE and SEIU together. For the very first time, we will bargain jointly from the very beginning, and we've already had success. For the first time in 40 years, the OHA has agreed to put RPN wages on a central table. This is great news. The truth is, though, that we have not been able to make substantial gains for RPNs after raising rates, which both of our unions did until about 10 years ago. But during this same period, the skills and competencies for RPNs have just exploded to the extent that RPNs are now able to do 96% of the skills that RNs can perform. The truth is that we've hit a bit of a brick wall through interest arbitration, which has been how we've been trying to resolve these disputes. And the lack of progress in recent years has led to a great deal of resentment about the fact that skills have been growing, but wages have not. Combining our strength and our resources to fight for a wage adjustment and for professional recognition at a dedicated table for nursing issues during central bargaining is something we are looking forward to. And the hospitals have agreed to a dedicated table for nursing issues during this round of central bargaining. We have agreed on an arbitrator, but our preference is to negotiate a collective agreement. In the March budget, cuts of 8% over 8 years for hospitals, $18 billion will be cut from healthcare over the next 8 years, according to the budget blueprint laid out by the Progressive Conservative government. And we are going to fight these cuts, but we expect that after the next election, we may face another round of wage restraint. One of the issues we have to deal with in bargaining is the fact that the province legislated a wage restraint program that dictates that for the first 3 years of the next agreement, increases in compensation are limited to no more than 1%. We have committed to write together to the Ontario government to ask to be exempted from the application of this legislation, and we're going to push on that as hard as we can. But it could be that we are going to be limited in the first 3 years, and that's why we want to negotiate a 4-year agreement so that we can make real progress on increasing nurses' wages. You will hear tonight about the survey and the polling that our unions have done of our members in nursing. It's our intention to release this information together during Nurses Week as we kick off our bargaining campaign. We're going to be asking you tonight to go to the website of SEIU Healthcare or the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions and complete an email to the Minister of Health asking for respect for RPNs. We are asking the government for pandemic pay. We're asking for paid sick leave and isolation pay and quarantine pay. And we're asking that all nurses and other healthcare workers must be fully vaccinated. Please take a minute after this call to send the email. Just go to the website of SEIU Healthcare or the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions and complete the email. We strongly believe that all of the hard work and sacrifice and courage and compassion and skill that the nurses that we represent has been seen, acknowledged, and valued by the public. And we believe that we can count on the public support for you going forward. We are going to campaign for true recognition for the RPNs that we represent. And that recognition has to be material. It has to be substantial. But to do that, we need your help. It starts with going to the website of SEIU Healthcare or the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions and completing the email. And if you could Facebook, post, Instagram, text, tweet your fellow nurses to also go to the websites, that would be a tremendous help. During Nurses Week, we'll be asking you to take another action, this time directed at your member of provincial parliament with the same goals. Please don't get discouraged. We're going to link arms and pool our resources and strength and push as hard as we can to make real progress. Our two unions are working very closely, and we will do everything that we can to help you win better wages and working conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. And again, everybody, I see some questions coming in. I just want to remind you that we will be taking your questions after we have some presenters, because I know that you're going to have more after you hear what they say. And Michael, do you want to introduce our next speaker, please?
Thank you very much, Charlene. Yes, our next speaker is Simran Prihar, and she is a lawyer with Goldblatt Partners, and she is a specialist in, among other things, many specialties, but one is professional practice issues. Welcome, Simran.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thanks, Charlene. Both very hard acts to follow, but I'm going to cover for the next few minutes the most recent government orders that have just come in last week and how they impact you as nurses. So on April 21st, last week, in response to the collapsing healthcare infrastructure that we see in Ontario during this devastating third wave, the government issued an order which effectively authorizes any healthcare professional to provide forms of medical care in hospitals that is not normally within their scope of practice. So the order applies to all regulated health professionals in Ontario, so doctors, nurses, dentists, optometrists, anyone, and as well as health professionals licensed by other Canadian provinces. And these healthcare professionals are authorized to engage in any aspect of the practice of any health profession. This is very concerning language. To do so, though, there are some conditions. So the professional must be providing services to hospital patients. So this applies to those of you who already work in hospitals, but also will apply to any of you working in long-term care who are redeployed to hospitals. As you know, there are previous orders allowing redeployment. It is necessary, in addition to be providing services in a hospital to hospital patients, it's also necessary for the professional to be providing those services in order to respond to, prevent, or alleviate the effects of the COVID pandemic. So again, the request to have you perform outside of your scope needs to be connected to the pandemic. The services need to be consistent with the duties that have been assigned or the privileges that have been granted by the hospital. So this just means that the hospital must approve of the healthcare professional providing the service. And last condition, the professional acts in a manner that is consistent with the measures that have been taken by the hospital under the initial health service provider's emergency order. So again, that links you back to the orders that allow things like changing your schedules, redeployment, all of those things. So given the extraordinary implications of this order, it provides also that it operates notwithstanding a range of health regulatory legislation, including the Nursing Act, including the Public Hospitals Act, including your collective agreements, and even practice standards of health colleges. However, of added concern, the order states that notwithstanding those exemptions, a member of one of Ontario's regulated health professions, which includes nurses, continues to be subject to their jurisdiction, to the jurisdiction of the college for, quote, incompetence, which occurs while the member provides services under the order. So this raises a host of issues. First, what does incompetence mean? It might be different elsewhere, but in Ontario, I can tell you that under the Regulated Health Professions Act, incompetence is directly spoken about and defined in discussing the powers of a panel of a college. And what it says is that a panel shall find a member to be incompetent if the member's professional care of a patient displayed a lack of knowledge, skill, or judgment of a nature or to an extent that demonstrates that the member is unfit to continue to practice or that their practice should be restricted. So in reality, the implication of this new order is not entirely clear because the order specifically authorizes individuals to engage in medical care that is outside of their scope of practice, and yet adds the caveat that you can still be prosecuted for incompetence. So how issues of incompetence will be adjudicated by the colleges in these circumstances is completely uncertain at this point. So the order was accompanied by a memo, and I just wanted to note one piece of that, which the memo from the Ministry of Health states clearly that hospitals are responsible to ensure that staff members are only assigned tasks or asked to deliver services that they are, quote, reasonably qualified to provide. And again, that's not defined. So, but it's there. It's not in the legislation itself, but it's in the memo, and I think that is something to keep in mind. The hospitals do have a responsibility, and the ministry does expect them to take on the responsibility of ensuring that the person who's being asked to perform a certain act is reasonably qualified. So, ostensibly, you shouldn't find yourself in a position where you would be at risk of being incompetent in the act, in performing an act that you've been ordered to perform. But of course, you have to keep in mind as nurses, in accordance with your professional standards at the CNO, you have accountability for your own knowledge, skills, and judgment as a nurse. Those professional standards still apply. So, and in particular, I'm going to just read out from your professional standards one piece, which is that all nurses are accountable for their own decisions and actions and for maintaining competence throughout their career. And so the professional standards of accountability and competence are still there. Nothing in this order relieves you from those professional standards, and the college has confirmed that. So the College of Nurses of Ontario has made a statement in particular about this order, but also about your standards. So in the statement that they made last week after the orders came out, they stated, the obvious, this new order only applies to nurses working in hospitals and does not, so they wanted to clarify the order does not permit nurses to practice outside of scope while they are working outside of a hospital. And they also say, and this is important, while this order allows nurses to work outside of scope, nurses are still required to work within their knowledge, skill, and judgment. So it appears from the statement, which is really, it's not a professional standard, it's just a statement, but what the college appears to be saying is that while you may be asked to do things outside your legal scope by the hospital, they are saying you are still responsible for monitoring your own personal scope. Very clearly saying you should not be working outside of your knowledge, skill, and judgment, no matter what. You will still be accountable under your professional standards. And regarding the professional standards, I'll note that actually just before the orders came out last week, the college had made an earlier statement on their website. They had updated the page, which sets out all the professional standards, the practice standards, and they made this statement. I'm going to read it out. You may be concerned about being able to maintain standards of practice, particularly when mobilized to work in other areas. And we want to assure you that the standard of care is always considered in context. The standard of care can evolve with the dynamic nature of the pandemic, including that resources may become scarce or absent. In this situation, it will be important to make reasonable efforts to comply with any direction from the Chief Medical Officer of Health and your workplace policies and procedures. While the CNO will continue to receive complaints and reports during the pandemic, we appreciate that nurses are always doing their best in every situation, and we will assess all information with consideration to the circumstances in which nurses are working. I think this statement says a lot more, but my view, of course, is tainted by the fact that I'm a lawyer, and so I would say you need to take it with a pinch of salt. They are saying they are going to look at the context of what you're being asked to do. They are at the same time saying you should comply with these orders from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. But my view is that while they're saying all of that, I would not bet my license on that because your professional standards still apply. So where you are a very experienced RPN, your personal scope, as you know, is going to be much different than that of a brand new RPN. It is up to the individual nurse to still figure out what is within your knowledge, skills, and judgment as a nurse and only do the things that fall within the window, the window of your scope. So practically speaking then, if you take off the lawyer hat and you're thinking practically, when a nurse is asked to do something which is outside of your scope, in my view, it would be the best course of action to identify that, right? So at the first instance, as a practical matter, you ask to do something that's outside of your scope, you don't feel you have the knowledge, skill, and judgment to do it. You need to identify that immediately. You need to ask for appropriate training, support, resources, as well as supervision while engaging in the act that you've been asked to perform. And if you're not provided with those appropriate supports, now remember, I'll take it back to the memo that says hospitals are responsible to ensure that you're reasonably qualified to provide these services. So asking for those supports puts the onus on the hospital to then provide those resources. And where those are not provided, it would be a situation where you really have to consider whether you should refuse that work because it's unsafe. It's outside of your scope. It's outside of your knowledge, skill, and judgment. And as scary as work refusals can sound, you have to think about your license. The hospital, who in some cases will not even be your employer, will not be liable to the CNO. Only the nurse will. I'll make one last note, which is that under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, which is the act under which all of these orders are made, some of you may have concerns about civil liability. Like, in addition to college proceedings, can you be sued? And so the EMCPA, that act, it provides immunity. So health professionals acting under the act or the authority of an order issued under that act will not be subject to, and this is worded in an interesting way, will not be subject to any action or other proceedings for actions they take or perform under the act or an order made under the act, or for neglect or default in performance of these acts where they are done in good faith. Neglect and default are not exactly the same thing as incompetence under the RHPA, though. So I just want to note that. And I will also note that in my sort of legal view, where this says you will not be subject to any other proceedings, I don't know that captures this discipline under the College of Nurses, because the order itself that came out on Thursday made a specific exception and states that you can still be prosecuted by your college for incompetence. So there may be a legal argument to be made whether you can be prosecuted for anything less than incompetence or disciplined for anything less than that. But again, you're not going to want to bet your nursing license on a legal argument that hasn't been made before. So you really are in an unprecedented time and uncharted territory, and you need to really be focusing on those core principles of knowledge, skill, and judgment. What is your knowledge, skill, and judgment, and how can you make sure that you're operating within that, even when asked to do things that may be outside of your legal scope of practice? So I'll leave it there, and we will answer questions again at the end, and I believe it's *3, and I'll hand it back to Charlene or Michael. Thank you.
And our next,
hi, it's Jackie Walker here. I'm just going to jump in, Michael. Thank you for that information. Really important. Nurses always want to make sure we cover our butts. So my name's Jackie Walker, and I want to thank all the RPNs for taking time out of their busy schedule and prioritizing to come and be on the call with us tonight. Like Sernem said, press *3 if you have questions. We'll get to those shortly. As Michael said, I'm the president of the nursing division at SEIU Healthcare, and I've been talking to some of the RPNs, and I think some of you are just as mad as me. Some RPNs have talked about this new order being reckless, and others have looked at it as a silver lining and an opportunity for us to show the province what we're really made of as RPNs. I do appreciate this silver lining. However, it doesn't cover up the dark cloud that, again, RPNs are going to be asked to step up and perform and to deliver a quality standard of quality care that the college has outlined. So my hope is that each one of you on the call tonight, and we're getting up to the thousands now, tells at least 3 RPNs about this call, so that you can share our next steps and our actions, and we can really raise the drumbeat and the undeniable and extraordinary contributions that you have all made in the past year. So tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the results of the SEIU Working Conditions Survey. We surveyed our RPNs in the hospital sector, and I just want to say it's really important for the RPNs from the long-term care sector who are here, because you need to be the watchdog, right? If any of this starts to trickle into your workplace where you are now being asked to step outside of your scope of practice as identified in your policies and procedures in the home, it's up to you to advocate and say, hold on, boss. This was not meant for us. This is a hospital order. So I'm really glad that some of you are here. So we know that we're not operating in a business as usual, and we can all agree that this is unprecedented times, right? The mental health of RPNs is at a critical state, and I wanted to share some statistics with you from our survey to let you know that you're not alone, to let you know that as we work through these orders, that if we can champion these statistics and these stats and really step up to the government and put pressure on them to take action and demonstrate, as Michael said, in a material way that they are on our side. So we know that nurses, RPN specifically, have said that they're experiencing increased stress and anxiety and at critical levels, and that's resulted in communication breakdown and low levels of morale. 93% of RPNs we surveyed said they're experiencing mental exhaustion. 91% have said that they're experiencing stress, and 93% say physical exhaustion at the end of a shift is a regular occurrence. And this is happening, I mean, you already know this, because you have an increased patient load without having additional staff complement and unsupportive management. And not to mention the all-day wear of PPE that you are wearing all day, and this is extremely exhausting. There's also constant changes to policy and a lack of consistency. And these are just some of the impacts that RPNs have pointed out in some of our surveys. So 90% of the RPNs we surveyed were women. And this really, to me, directly shows that we're a female-dominated profession, and perhaps there's a connection there, that our burden of being the primary caregiver at work trickles into our home. We're the primary caregiver, we're the teacher, often the sole breadwinner, and you know, that has increased RPN's anxiety. So I want us to think about this not just as a nursing issue, but this is also a women's issue, and we need to, you know, speak truth to that. Many RPNs have not received their second vaccine, and you fear bringing COVID-19 home to your family. This is all so true, and these are from the words of RPNs that we surveyed at SEIU. There's no doubt that our union leadership, the staff who are working to support you, and most importantly you, have seen an increase in your workload in the past year. When surveyed, 94% of RPNs have experienced short staffing regularly, and you know what this means, greater demands on you as a caregiver, but it also has an impact on our patients and residents. And 72% of RPNs believe that insufficient staffing is leading to a decrease in patient care and the quality of patient care that we know we should be providing and that our patients suffer. Some of the speakers tonight have talked about the role of government to make RPNs feel whole. And on February 24th, we polled some nurses and we asked them if the government wage cap, Bill 124, has made you reconsider your career as an RPN, and nearly 80% of the nurses on the line said yes, they've considered leaving the profession. So we know we have to do something extraordinary because we can't afford that, right? The new orders will impact the workload of RPNs in the hospital sector. Even though 72% of RPNs surveyed said that they believe they can practice to their full scope, we can expect that number to rise. The limits that RPNs reported to be a barrier to practice to full scope, they may and probably will be removed by this emergency order. So what were those barriers? 64% of RPNs said it's the restrictive policy. So now with this emergency order, these policies may be broadly expanded to include RPNs to carry out any nursing intervention that the hospital might reasonably see RPNs qualified to perform. RPN should definitely adhere to the principle that if the RPN is not named clearly in that policy, that the hospital has not reasonably assigned the RPN to take on that skill or that assignment. So this is where your voice matters, because this is where you have to advocate and identify that X is outside of your scope of practice. So 26% of RPN said that what prevents them from working the full scope was that is work of the bargaining unit of the RN. So knowing that there's around a 90% overlap in the hospital sector of RN and RPN and 95% overlap in long-term care, this barrier can be removed by the employer policy being updated to include the RPN being named as a provider of a specific skill, role, responsibility, or assignment. 10% of nurses, RPN specifically, said that our employers are not aware of our scope of practice. Okay, so this is important to recognize, right? That now employers must, for a lack of a better word, must audit the skills and abilities of any regulated professional in the hospital. So they might ask you to do something, as was mentioned before, and if you do not have the knowledge, skill, and judgment to do that, you must say no, right? So I would recommend going to a new floor and notifying your team of what your knowledge, skill, and judgment is, especially if it's a new care area. In the past year, in our survey, 20% said that they've been placed in charge, and we will probably see more of this with the new order. And it's important that RPNs in charge are given the appropriate training, mentorship, supervision, and orientation to take on this role. I just want to remind you to press *3 if you have any questions, and just be reminded that in a day or two, this live recording is going to be shared on our social media outlets by both unions, and we strongly encourage you to share the link and share the collective call to action with RPNs who couldn't be here tonight, because as Michael said, it's going to take all of us to step up to really make some change. So right now, I'm going to pass it over to Sister Sharon Richer, who's the Secretary-Treasurer of CUPE, Ontario Council of Hospital Workers, to share some of the, they were riveting to me, poll results that were captured through polling CUPE RPN. So I'll pass it over to Sharon.
Thanks very much, Jackie. I really appreciate that. So just before we get to your questions, I know there's a whole bunch of people waiting in the queue. It's *3 on your telephone if you have a question, and we'll get to them very shortly. The Ontario Council of Hospital Unions of the Canadian Union of Public Employees conducted a poll amongst our RPNs, which are represented by our union. The purpose of the poll was to gather information from RPNs for workplace issues, including health and safety, workload, morale during COVID-19 pandemic. We surveyed 2,650 RPNs from across the Toronto GTA area, Ottawa, Eastern Ontario, Hamilton, Southwestern Ontario, and Northern Ontario. This survey took place on March 29th till April the 3rd. Some of the questions that we had asked our RPNs was, how many years have you been working as an RPN? And, 59% of the RPNs polled said that they had been working at either 10 years or more as an RPN. When we asked the question, are you working full-time, part-time, or casual? 31% said that they were either working part-time or casual. But more than 7 in 10, or 71%, said they would really prefer a full-time job in the workplace. When we asked the question, had you been working throughout the COVID pandemic from March 2020 till present, it wasn't surprising to us that 93% said they had worked through the pandemic. And then the second question when we asked, how has your workload changed in the past year? And in total, 97% said that there had been an increase in their workload throughout the year of the pandemic. And we know that we can see that through SEIU's findings also. More patients added, hospitals overcrowded, just donning and doffing your PPE for patients. So you can absolutely see that the workload has increased. Have incidents of violence from patients or families directed to you and your coworkers increased or decreased over the past year? And 7 in 10 RPNs, so 70% of the RPNs that we polled, stated that the incidence of violence had increased over this past 12 months. And we know that from people, from screeners to swabbers, people have been reporting the high levels of violence. The government has been telling us that about 20% of healthcare workers have been exposed to COVID. But when we asked our RPNs, 42% of the RPNs that were surveyed had been exposed to COVID at work, which has forced them to either isolate or quarantine. And of those, 1/3 of the RPNs that were surveyed had caught COVID-19 at the hospital, and they were not paid for their time off, either being quarantined or on a sick leave. We asked how our nurses were coping with COVID-19 over the past year, and it was not surprising to us the results. They are very concerned about infecting their families, friends, and loved ones with COVID-19. 91% said they were really concerned about it. When we asked how they were doing mental health-wise or coping or the morale at work, more than half of them stated that their coping was extremely poor or poor. 43% of them described their mental health as being extremely poor or poor. And 37% said that their workplace morale is either extremely poor or poor. And we know that with everybody isolating, not being able to go into the lunchrooms, not being able, to talk to your coworkers, not being able to find a replacement, working double shifts, the morale in the hospitals is extremely down. The final question that we asked our RPNs, if they were considered leaving nursing, those considering or maybe considering quitting were given an open-ended question with a multiple choice answer. And, those who were considering leaving said that a pay increase, so 83% of those said who were leaving, 83% said a pay increase would absolutely get them to stay. More staffing would be another reason to stay, but quite concerning when you look at already the population of RPNs in your workplace not being able to fill in job postings, vacancies, that 29% of people were considered leaving the profession. So this is also a huge problem. Okay, so that was our poll. We will be releasing this poll during Nurses Week in communities across Ontario. But now, why don't we get to your questions? I'm going to turn the call back over to Charlene.
Great. Jackie and Sharon, thank you so much. There's so much information collected from surveys and polls that your two unions, SEIU and OCHU, have been working on over the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to start off by pulling out some of these questions, but a common theme in there is definitely the recognition that RPNs are not paid enough. And I got to tell you, we've had some pretty heated conversations, our two unions, over the last couple of weeks about how it's time that stops. And, if we look at any positive thing that came out of the last 13, 14 months with this pandemic, is that not only your unions that always knew, but the public and the government absolutely, without a doubt, have recognized how valued you are. They call you heroes and angels. Well, I can tell you, we're all fired up for this next round of bargaining, reminding them of absolutely everything that you guys have identified in your questions. We recognize that the $4 an hour temporary wage increase for the, $3 for the PSWs lessens that gap between the PSWs and the RPNs, and it broadens the gap between RPNs and RNs. We know that. But what we're going to ask you tonight, to go back and you ask your fellow RPNs, are you ready to fight? Have you truly, honestly had enough? Are you ready to do whatever it takes to get that respect that you have deserved for many, many, many decades already. This, as I mentioned, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We have the public on our side. We've got the patients and the families on our side. What we need is to get the RPNs on the side, locking arms with CUPE and SEIU to fight for these things to be corrected this time. So if you take away anything from this tonight, you go back to work and you tell your colleagues that they got to step up this time, because we're coming at the province and at the employers hard to address all these comments that you're all saying on here. So obviously I'm fired up because I know we're going to be able to do it, and this is our chance to do that. So pointing out some of the questions, we've got a question here from Vanessa. She's saying, I was relocated to ICU. What are the expectations or scope of practice within the ICU? How long will this last? Will there be a wage increase to reflect the work? Who would like to answer that? I know, Simran, you said stuff about, don't work anything outside of what you're reasonably qualified for. Do you have anything else to add to that? And then I don't know if Jackie or Sharon want to comment.
Sure. I'll quickly just say, in terms of, depending on where you work normally, in terms of what the expectations are in an ICU, I assume wherever you are currently going from, the expectations may be different and potentially higher in the ICU. And so it's really key to find out what are your expectations. Sometimes they'll reallocate you. If they reallocate you to the ICU, but they just ask you to do basic tasks that anybody can do, and you're really just helping out, that's one thing. But if you're given a full patient load, then you need to be able to ask yourself and ask your management, what are the supports that I'm being given here? This is if it's outside of your scope, you need to identify it. It's very important to monitor that yourself as the nurse, because you will be responsible to your college if something goes wrong. So that's what I'll say there, and then I can let others address the pay increase question and other pieces.
Thank you, Jackie. Oh, sorry, Michael.
Sorry, Charlene. I just wanted to let Barb DeRoche, who's the president of the QB Local at the Kingston Hospitals, know that she's asking if there will be a legal guidance document for the RPNs. And Simran has been kind enough to agree to put together her notes for this evening into a communique, which our unions can get out probably Thursday morning to everyone. So I just wanted to reassure people about that. Back to you, Charlene.
Great. That's wonderful, Michael. Thank you. That was a question in there. Jackie, Sharon, do you have anything else to add to the question?
I would just add to Vanessa's question, for everybody, we have to use our voice, right? It might be uncomfortable to say, I'm not able to do that. And I know RPNs have had the finger pointed at them, like that you can't do this and you can't do that. But to protect your license and to be a contributor of positive patient outcomes, we have to look within, identify our knowledge, skill, and judgment, and then communicate that with the team if we are able or unable to perform whatever skill. So I would just say that. And about the pay, Vanessa, this is why it's so important that we all step up and say something and take some action. And that might be a work refusal, and that might be sending a letter, but it's important for us to all to take some action because, we are going to go to the bargaining table and we're going to fight like hell. We know we have Bill 124 rammed down our throats from the government, but we still need to raise up the fact that RPNs are capable and RPNs have been capable, and that's why we need to come strong with our actions together. I'll just leave it at that, Charlene.
Charlene, Simran, Corey from a QB hospital in southwestern Ontario is asking, and maybe Simran can help with this. She's saying it was mentioned that most nurses are waiting for a second dose of vaccine, but she knows many nurses still waiting for the first dose. Wants to know if those still waiting for a first dose should be doing anything more. Believes it's a frightening situation. Maybe Simran could respond. And Corey, could you let us know which hospital you're from? Could you tell the screener which hospital you're from so we could follow up with you? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So in terms of, I was actually very surprised to see that in the questions that there are some RPNs or other healthcare workers, I guess, waiting for their first dose, it is very clear in the government guidelines you're entitled to your first dose. The second dose is obviously a whole other issue that we're still fighting about. But with respect to the first dose, if you know people who are healthcare workers who haven't been given the first dose, they really should be able to, and I don't think that's necessarily through your employer, but even through your employer, is be able to get online or get into a system where they can book an appointment and get a first dose. If they don't, they meet the criteria for the Pfizer and Moderna. You don't have to worry about going to the pharmacies for that. I think that is very concerning. And so, yes, if Corey, if you do jump back on and identify your hospital, that's something that can be dealt with individually as well. That's pretty outrageous.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you again for answering that, Simran. There's a couple of questions. I'm going to try and bulk some out. Should employees currently off due to injury be concerned at all about being forced back to work? There's also questions in here about refusing work if you feel that it's too far outside your scope of practice. Again, Simran, do you want to answer those two questions? I kind of bulked them together.
Sure, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Charlene. With respect to being outside of your scope, all the things that I said before, I would just reiterate that. If it's too far outside your scope, you have to identify it. There's no, there's no reason for that to be happening. As we have seen, this order allows all healthcare professionals to be redeployed. And I think there's a lot going to be happening with doctors and residents as well. So if it's way outside your scope, you got to identify it, and you can refuse to do that and without some sort of very specific training. Because, of course, your scope can be increased if you get the right kind of training. But with respect to being forced back to work from an injury leave or a medical leave of some sort, technically, yes, the emergency order that came out last year allows that to happen, allows leaves to be canceled if necessary, if considered reasonably necessary by the employer. And that phrase has been litigated. Reasonably necessary has been found to apply to those powers that the hospitals have to cancel leaves. So the hospital will have to show that it's really, really necessary. And I think that, at least last year, the OHA was clear when those orders came out that they had no intention of calling back people who were on those types of leaves. But now we're in this extremely crushing third wave. And so, as I've said before, you can't really trust anything that anybody's saying. The legal order does allow that to happen, but it does have to be reasonably necessary.
If I could add one thing to the RPNs, if you're looking for a guide or the steps to take on refusing safe work, the nursing division at SEIU's created a guide, and it can be found at seiunurses.ca. And it's a nurse's guide to advocating in the coronavirus pandemic, and it will walk you through the work refusal process while considering your responsibility as a nurse to transfer accountability safely of a patient. So I would encourage you to check that out. Thanks.
Simran, we have a question from Lauren, who's an RPN at one of the QP hospitals. She's asking, concerning disregarding the scope of practice, are we allowed to decline work that we feel we are not qualified for? Will there be punishment from management?
Yeah, so that's actually something that I neglected to mention in my presentation. So if you do decide after reviewing the task that you've been asked to do that it's outside of your scope and you refuse, will you be punished? Maybe, right? We don't know. We hope not, but we can't guarantee that you won't be disciplined. But in that case, my answer to you as a lawyer would be you have to grieve that. And absolutely, as always, the rule is that you obey now and grieve later. And you may be asked, but with respect to your license, it's a little bit of a different story, right? When you are acting outside of your scope, it's patient safety that's at risk. And so I think it will be really rare that we'll see employers disciplining for this, but if they do discipline you, you have to grieve. And yes, grievance procedures are, about the orders are suspended, but not all grievance procedures are suspended. So I think that it's very important that if you are acting within your rights, protecting your license, and you are disciplined or you are in some way reprimanded by your employer, you should absolutely take that to your union.
There are concerns here. A couple of people have raised. One is about out-of-province nurses moving ahead of people who want to work in Ontario, and the other has to do with part-timers not getting enough work and other people bumping them up. And I know that Charlene and I can raise these issues directly with the government, as well as the issue of vaccination. We meet the government pretty much every week, and we'll raise those issues with the people who are responsible for redeployment.
Absolutely, Michael. And I'm seeing a question here. It says it's from O'Leary, saying, is this purely for hospitals or does this apply to LTC nursing homes? The redeployment order definitely does affect nursing homes as well. So our most recent conversation, as Michael referenced with the government, is that they are really doing a two-way redeployment. Some hospital workers may be being redeployed, we found that out this week, into long-term care because, as you all know, there's been patients transferred from hospitals into the nursing homes and vice versa, that there could be staff going in. So all of the things that we said and questions that we answered absolutely apply to all of you, especially when it comes to scope of practice. I just want to reiterate too, there's a lot of stuff on here about, do I have to go, or, somebody took a job trying to avoid the COVID units. We have both been told, both of our unions, all unions have been told that this is supposed to be on a volunteer basis. And I know somebody made a comment that they were told to, they didn't get to volunteer, and if you are feeling any pressure to do anything that you're not comfortable with or that you are being forced to do it, I recommend that you get a hold of your union rep or representative at your workplace and make sure that they know, because they have said volunteer, and all unions have stressed, very sternly that, first of all, scope of practice, we've said we're going to be telling our nurses that if they're not comfortable, not to do that work, and also that you should not be forced to be taking anything that you feel uncomfortable with. They've stressed the volunteer. They've also given commitments to take a look at reimbursing for expenses if you're asked to go to another hospital, travel expenses, food allowances, that type of stuff. So believe me, like Michael said, every time we are on the phone with the government, we're pressuring them for those things. Pandemic pay, we're always fighting for pandemic pay. When we all think back a year ago, when they so graciously gave us that $4, some didn't get it. You think that was in wave one. Now, wave three, possibly wave four, if ever, pandemic pay and a permanent wage adjustment was definitely needed and justified. It's now. So, rest assured, all of our unions are advocating for that $4 to be brought back, reinstated to everybody, and made permanent.
I think we should probably regrettably move on to the last remarks. I think, Charlene, it's 8:30 already.
You're right.
We've had a lot of questions here. I regret moving on, truly.
And as you've been told, everybody, you can go on our websites and you can find, this will be filmed shortly. Like Michael said, we will have the document for you. And just before we pass it on to Judy, I just want to, again, thank all of my QP colleagues, my sisters and my brother, Michael Hurley, for joining us tonight, for all that we've done together. Your strong leadership and your advocacy and your fierce fight to protect the workers that we're so privileged to represent is just so humbling, and SEIU is honored to be working with you. I can't wait to see our work together in the future and winning some wins for all of these precious people on the line. So thank you, Sharon, Judy, Michael, and Simran for joining us. So over to you, Judy.
Thanks, Charlene. Hello, my name is Judy Bain, and I've been an RPN. I work at the Kenora Hospital for over 35 years, and I am currently the Ontario Council of Hospital Union / QP RPN Committee's chair. I think it's very exciting that QP and SEIU are bargaining together this year as we did in 2017.
It's such a great idea to bring together all RPNs working in hospitals to push together for professional recognition and for higher wages. Look at our joint effort tonight. By pooling our numbers, we were able to invite the 15,000 RPNs that we represent onto this call. That's a huge number of nurses, and what a great force for a change. Nursing Week is coming up beginning May the 10th, and QP and SEIU will be releasing the survey and poll that you heard Jackie and Sharon review that week in a series of media conferences across Ontario. In those media conferences, we will call at that time our MPPs asking that all frontline staff be vaccinated and receive pandemic pay for $4 an hour, and that all of us have access to personal protective equipment that we need to work safely. We will have another call for RPNs just before Nurses Week. Tonight, we ask that you go to the website of SEIU Healthcare and QP and the Council of Hospital Unions, and send an email to the Minister of Health asking Mrs. Elliott to ensure that all frontline staff are fully vaccinated with both doses, and that all RPNs and healthcare staff receive pandemic pay of $4 an hour, and that we all have access to the personal protective equipment that we need to work safely. It only takes a minute to do this. Our hope is that the Minister of Health will receive thousands of emails tonight. All you have to do is take 5 minutes. Go to the website of SEIU Healthcare or QP OCHU. Sign your name to the form letter you will find there to the Ontario Minister of Health. Please ask your coworkers who weren't able to be on this call tonight to take this action as well. Working together is a great opportunity and our best opportunity to make real progress. Already, the hospitals have agreed to bargain with both unions at one time and to dedicate discussions about nursing issues, including wages. The best way for us to achieve our goals for a real wage increase and professional recognition is to be more active. We're counting on your help. Please join us again for another RPN call during Nurses Week. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Please stay safe and good night.